This is humanity's first true contact with extraterrestrials. It is also humanity's first encounter with a civilization beyond Earth. 3 days ago, 12 shell-shaped spacecrafts passed through the atmosphere and arrived at 12 different locations on Earth. The ships hovered vertically and remained motionless without taking any further action. In each of the 12 countries where the ships were located, layers upon layers of military forces were deployed around them. The U.S. authorities acted swiftly, inviting renowned linguist Louise, along with theoretical mathematician and physics professor Ian, to participate. The two arrived at a newly established civil base. The 12 countries had formed a defensive alliance. They were engaged in 24-hour, non-stop information sharing to prepare for any unforeseen events that might occur, while also readying themselves for the possibility of war. Louise and Ian's only task was to make contact with the extraterrestrials in the U.S. spacecraft, decipher their language, and understand the reason for their arrival. Given the urgency, the two only briefly understood the task before initiating the first contact. They donned heavy protective suits and, under military escort, arrived beneath the spacecraft. It was then that they discovered that every 18 hours, the ship would automatically open an entrance. The entrance was neither too large nor too small, just big enough for humans to enter. Using a military elevator, they were taken directly into the ship's interior. As soon as they entered, they immediately felt as if they were floating. One person effortlessly leapt across and landed on the opposite side of the hallway. The gravity issue, which humanity had long struggled with, seemed trivial here. After traversing the hallway, they arrived at a grand hall. Before them was a wall-sized mirror, beyond which was thick white mist. When someone set up a camera and released a bird to check the air, two beings slowly emerged from the white fog. They had 7 legs, and their bodies were cylindrical, which led humanity to refer to them as heptapods. Louise and Ian recorded the low hums of the heptapods, but due to the lack of linguistic reference, the meaning behind their sounds was completely incomprehensible. 18 hours passed, and the two still had no progress. Under intense pressure from the military, the two began the second contact. To make progress, Louise prepared a writing board. She wrote the word human on it and pointed to herself. The heptapods seemed to understand Louise's gesture. One of them extended a leg, spraying ink from it. The ink automatically formed a symbol. The other heptapod did the same, producing a different symbol. The two symbols fused, creating a new symbol. Afterwards, the official in charge approached Louise, needing an explanation. Why had they given their language to the heptapods? Louise didn't answer directly but instead told a story.
Captain James Cook's ship ran aground off the coast of Australia, and he led a party into the country, and they met the Aboriginal people. One of the sailors pointed at the animals that hop around and put their babies in their pouch, and he asked what they were, and the Aborigine said, kangaroo.
And a point is?
It wasn't until later that they learned that kangaroo means I don't understand, so.
Clearly, Louise wanted to avoid misunderstandings. If both parties understood the meaning of a word, they would end up spending 10 times more effort explaining it. The official was persuaded but requested that, before the next contact, Louise provide a vocabulary list. He also reminded Louise not to forget the fate of those indigenous peoples. Soon, Louise selected a large number of elementary-level vocabulary words, such as eat and go. They needed to ask the crucial question, what is your purpose for coming to Earth? To get an answer, they first had to determine 2 things. 1, whether the heptapod culture understands what a question is, and 2, whether they understand the concept of a purpose, the conscious decision to make a choice, rather than following an instinctual motivation. This was especially important. Thus, Louise chose basic vocabulary to ensure they had enough terms to communicate and understand the heptapod's responses. With this vocabulary, they began the third contact. Louise made a bold decision. She confirmed that the environment the bird was in was safe. Ignoring her companion's objections, Louise removed her heavy protective suit and walked up to the mirror. Louise pointed to her name written on the board and then pointed to herself. The heptapods immediately understood her meaning and released a new symbol. The other heptapod responded similarly. Clearly, these 2 symbols represented their names. Although Louise and Ian couldn't pronounce them, they could clearly sense that the heptapods harbored no ill intentions. However, as Louise returned to the ground, a sudden vision appeared before her eyes. The hallucination lasted only for a short time, and she couldn't clearly make out what she saw. The doctor performed a thorough examination of Louise, but found no signs of radiation or any unknown viral infection. The doctor's conclusion was simple. Louise was suffering from exhaustion, but as contact and decoding efforts continued, the hallucinations grew more frequent and clearer. In her visions, Louise saw a young girl. Although they had never met, the girl seemed strangely familiar. As the days went on, they gradually began to understand the meanings of some of the symbols. They realized that the heptapod system of abbreviations had no connection between them. These symbols were purely used to convey meaning, with no relationship to pronunciation. In Pakistan, researchers studied the heptapod's writing system and were astonished to find that the heptapod symbols had no upright direction. Linguists called it a non-linear writing system. It sounded complex, but in simple terms, it was like using both hands from either side to write simultaneously. To write a sentence, one first has to consider not just the characters used, but also the entire space occupied by the sentence. The heptapods could write a symbol in 2 seconds, and this symbol contained a wealth of complex statements. If humans were to write down the meaning contained in one of their symbols, it would probably take a month to finish. Meanwhile, riots broke out around the world. Someone had posted a photo of the heptapods online, and fear consumed people's rationality. The unanimous suggestion was to declare war on the heptapods. Louise and Ian had little time left. They nearly gave up on rest. But that night, Louise experienced another vision. In the vision, it was the same young girl again. She called Louise mother, but Louise's husband was nowhere to be seen. From the girl's expression, it seemed that Louise's husband had left them for some unknown reason. Then, Louise saw that the girl who called her mother would soon suffer from a terminal illness, but Louise fully woke up and returned to the resting room. Ian was by her side, very concerned about Louise's mental state. He explained that when a person is immersed in a foreign language for a long time, their thought process begins to reconstruct. Clearly, Louise had been affected by the heptapod's writing. The next day, another contact was initiated. After extensive decoding, they were now able to spell out simple heptapod symbols. Finally, they were able to ask the most crucial question humanity had been waiting for.
This earth, what is your purpose?
What does it say?
Offer weapon.
This brief sentence sparked an intense argument in the base. Louise believed that perhaps the heptapods had simply reversed the terms weapon and tool, much like human language's use of polysemy. But the higher-ups believed the situation was more complicated. They ordered Louise and Ian to keep this information to themselves and not share it with the other 11 countries. The higher-ups saw all other 11 countries as enemies. However, at that very moment, China and Russia severed communication first, and other countries quickly followed suit. It turned out that, at the same time, China had also decoded the heptapod symbols, and the translation revealed the meaning of use weapon. The military commander immediately shared the content with the world and began negotiations with other countries. But during this time, no one noticed a pair of American soldiers stealthily approaching the spaceship. Among them, 3 men placed a bomb inside the hall where the heptapods had been contacted. Louise, eager to clarify whether use weapon could mean something else, returned to the hall with Ian, unaware of the bomb behind them. Before they could ask any questions, the heptapods suddenly directed Louise to stand before the mirror. One of them sprayed a stream of ink, and under its guidance, Louise wrote a symbol herself. As Louise wrote down the symbol, another vision appeared. This time, it was a scene of Louise giving birth to a baby girl. The vision felt incredibly real, as if it was something that would happen in the future. After Louise successfully completed the symbol, one of the heptapods sprayed out a massive amount of ink. The ink automatically formed dense clusters of symbols. Then, just 1 second before the bomb detonated, the heptapods ejected Louise and Ian from the ship. When Louise regained consciousness, she found herself at the temporary base. A military officer informed her that the explosion had been caused by insurgents. To prevent the heptapods from retaliating, they had to evacuate immediately. But before the officer could finish speaking, the ground suddenly shook violently. The heptapod ship ascended higher into the sky, clearly indicating their refusal to communicate further with humans. Louise and Ian hurriedly worked to translate the dense symbols. However, they were devastated to realize that translating all the symbols would take several years. Ian, however, noticed that the symbol for time appeared frequently among the clusters, but the content was incomplete. By analyzing the blank areas in the patterns, Ian hypothesized that the symbols they had were only 1/12 of the entire message. In other words, the symbols collected by the 12 nations needed to be combined to form a complete message. They immediately reported this to the higher-ups, but it was already too late. The situation had reached its most critical point, and no one was willing to share their findings publicly. Just as Louise felt completely at a loss, another vision appeared. She saw small ships descending from the sky and herself using her hands to guide the ink sprayed by the heptapods. Following the guidance of the vision, Louise quietly left the base. Driving to the ship's location, just as she had seen in her vision, the heptapods released a small craft that landed in front of her. Louise entered the small craft, and as the hatch closed, everything turned pitch black. When the hatch reopened, she found herself on the other side of the mirror. The area was shrouded in white mist, and the deep, resonant hums of the heptapods echoed in the distance. For the first time, Louise saw the full form of a heptapod. During their conversation, Louise learned that one of the heptapods had perished in the explosion while saving her and Ian. Louise expressed her sorrow but quickly explained her purpose. She hoped the heptapods could stop the impending war. The heptapods replied that they had already provided her with the weapon. Louise now possessed the ability to prevent the war. The heptapods also had a request. They would need humanity's help in 3,000 years. The weapon they had given was their language, which had the power to transcend time. The visions Louise had been experiencing were glimpses of the future, made possible by her gradual mastery of their language. After explaining everything, the heptapods disappeared back into the mist. When Louise descended from the ship, all the heptapod ships around the world simultaneously flipped upside down, hovering in the sky. Every nation prepared for war, and Louise's base was also in the midst of an emergency evacuation. Louise had to act quickly. She found the image of the symbols and began to predict the future. In her vision, she saw herself publishing a book about the heptapods' language and teaching it in universities worldwide. At a celebration banquet 18 months later, Louise discovered the key to solving the problem. She met General Shang, who thanked her for her contributions to humanity and for contacting him at the crucial moment with his private number. But at that moment, Louise didn't know General Shang's private number. Just as she was about to ask, General Shang took out his phone. It became evident that General Shang had also mastered the heptapods' language and, like Louise, was experiencing non-linear time. He had specifically sought her out to complete the final piece of the puzzle, ensuring the past led to this peaceful future. General Shang shared his wife's last words with Louise as proof to persuade her past self. Louise returned to the base and stole her superior's phone. In humanity's final moments before attacking, she called General Shang and relayed his wife's final words. War accomplishes nothing but leaving behind widows and orphans. 30 minutes later, General Shang held an emergency press conference, announcing the immediate cessation of hostilities. He also unconditionally shared the 1/12 of the content they had received, with General Shang taking the lead. Other nations followed suit, de-escalating tensions and sharing their findings. At the same time, all the heptapod ships ascended into the sky and left Earth collectively. Louise finally pieced together her future. She would marry Ian, and they would have a beautiful daughter. Tragically, their daughter would develop a terminal illness in the future. When Louise shared this with Ian, he couldn't accept it and eventually left her quietly. Now, Louise stood at the crossroads again, hearing Ian's confession of love. Even knowing the future, she chose to be with him anyway. Even though she already knew this journey's end, she embraced it. Because the destination was never what mattered. Life would always fade with time. New life would replace the old. And what truly mattered were the moments along the journey, those beautiful, fleeting moments that existed only in the present.